My name is Aaron Cade, and for years, Ridgecliff had been both my refuge and my burden. I came here to build something honest, a bank that treated people like neighbors, not numbers. I'd thought of Ridgecliff as a kind of second family, a place where my late wife Leah's dreams lived on through my work. But families, like dreams, can unravel when you least expect it. I never imagined the crack in my foundation would come from Leah's cousin, Jake Mercer, a man I trusted like a brother. He was there when Leah and I said, "I do," the best man in both title and, at least at the time, actions. And yet, years later, he was the one who almost tore everything apart. It all began with whispers, subtle changes in the air. Jake had always been charismatic, the type of guy who could sell a snow shovel in the middle of summer. But lately, his charm had started to feel off. I'd catch him in my office with a nervous laugh or see his eyes dart away when I asked too many questions. I chalked it up to stress. Running a bank in a small town wasn't easy, and Jake had always thrived under pressure. Or so I thought. That night, the night I stumbled upon the truth, started like any other. I was at my desk, poring over loan approvals, when I noticed something strange. A significant sum of money was missing. Just gone. It wasn't a one-time mistake either. The withdrawals were methodical, spread out over months, almost as if someone had been testing how far they could go before getting caught. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, staring at the numbers on the screen. This wasn't just an error. This was betrayal. And deep down, I knew exactly who was behind it. Jake. But it wasn't enough to suspect. I needed proof, irrefutable evidence to confront him. I spent the next week unraveling his deception. Sleepless nights and strained days became my norm as I pieced together the paper trail he'd left behind, one breadcrumb at a time. Confrontation wasn't just about the money, it was about trust, about everything Leah and I had built. And as I stood in Jake's office late one evening, holding the evidence in my shaking hands, I thought about her. About how she believed in him, in family. About the promises I'd made to her before cancer took her away. "Jake," I said, my voice heavier than I intended. "What is this?" He looked up, his usual smug grin replaced by something colder. His eyes flicked to the stack of papers I threw on his desk, then back to me. He didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he laughed. Jake's laugh hit me like a slap to the face. Mocking, bitter, and full of a confidence that turned my stomach. "Aaron, you really don't get it, do you?" he said, leaning back in his chair as if this was all some game he'd already won. "Don't get what?" I asked, my voice shaking more than I wanted. "That no one in this town cares about your noble little mission," he said, gesturing vaguely around the office. "Your bank, your rules, your promises, they're just tools. Tools to survive. You've been playing the hero, Aaron, but me? I've been playing to win." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're stealing from the very people who trusted you, who trusted me. These are farmers, single parents, families trying to make ends meet. Do you even understand what you've done?" Jake just shrugged. "What I've done," he said, smirking, "is make sure I don't end up like the rest of these people, struggling until the day they drop dead. I'm not sorry for wanting more, Aaron." And honestly, neither was Leah. Hearing her name come out of his mouth like that, it was like he'd crossed a line I didn't even know existed. My hands curled into fists at my sides. "Don't you dare bring her into this." "Oh, come on," he said, leaning forward now, his tone dripping with condescension. "Leah always thought you were too good for your own damn self. She knew you didn't have it in you to make the hard choices. That's why she always vouched for me, because she knew I wasn't afraid to do what had to be done." I felt like I was going to explode. "What you've done," I said through gritted teeth, "is ruin everything she stood for. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed her memory. And for what? Money?" "For survival," Jake snapped, his smug expression slipping for the first time. "Do you have any idea what it's like to scrape by every damn day? To watch other people get ahead while you're stuck in neutral? This isn't about money, Aaron. It's about power. It's about control. And right now I've got both." His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He was right, in a way. If I went public with this, the scandal would destroy Ridgecliff trust. People would lose faith in the bank. And in me. Jake had me cornered, and he knew it. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that I wasn't the same man I used to be. Losing Leah had changed me. Grief had hardened me, given me a resilience I didn't even realize I had. I wasn't just going to roll over and let him win. I stood there for a moment, staring at him, trying to rein in the storm raging inside me. Finally, I spoke, my voice low but steady. You think you've won, Jake. But you've underestimated me. You're going to pay for what you've done, not just to me, but to this entire town. Mark my words. Jake smirked, leaning back in his chair again like he didn't have a care in the world. Good luck with that, he said, his voice oozing with arrogance. But as I turned and walked out of his office, leaving him to bask in his false sense of security, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. I didn't just want justice. I wanted revenge. The days after my confrontation with Jake were a blur of anger and strategy. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see his smug face, hear that laugh. But anger wasn't going to solve this. It wasn't going to bring him down. No, I needed to be smart. Calculated. If Jake thought he had me cornered, I'd let him think that for just a little longer. The first step was to gather every shred of evidence. I stayed late at the bank every night, poring over account records, cross-referencing transactions, and documenting everything I could. It was like piecing together a puzzle, and with every piece I added, the picture became clearer and uglier. Jake hadn't just siphoned off funds. He'd done it in ways that hurt the most vulnerable. Small business loans approved 1 week, then mysteriously revoked the next. Funds allocated for a local charity misplaced. He didn't just steal money, he stole hope. I felt sick. Ridgecliff Trust wasn't just a bank, it was a promise, a lifeline. And Jake had turned it into his personal piggy bank. I needed help. But not from just anyone. I couldn't risk word getting out before I was ready. So I reached out to the one person I knew I could trust completely. Sophia. We'd grown close in the months since we started seeing each other. She wasn't just my girlfriend, she was my anchor, my voice of reason. When I told her everything, her reaction was immediate. He's disgusting, she said, pacing my living room. To betray you, to betray the town like that. Erin, we can't let him get away with this. We won't, I assured her. But I need your help. I can't do this alone. Her eyes softened. Whatever you need, she said. With her help, I reached out to a forensic accountant, an old friend of hers from nursing school who'd switched careers. Discreetly, of course. I couldn't afford for Jake to get even a whiff of what I was planning. Over the next few weeks, the three of us worked tirelessly, uncovering even more of Jake's dirty dealings. But it wasn't just about the money. If I wanted to take Jake down, I needed to hit him where it hurt. His reputation. And for that, I turned to the local press. Ridgecliff's newspaper, the Ridgecliff Sentinel, wasn't exactly the New York Times, but it was well respected in town. Its editor, a no-nonsense woman named Janice Harper, had a reputation for digging into stories that others were too afraid to touch. I called her late one night, explaining everything over the phone. At first, she was skeptical. Erin, these are serious accusations, she said. If you're wrong. I'm not wrong, I interrupted. I have proof. And I'll share it with you. Under one condition. What's that? You can't publish anything until I say so. Not until I have everything in place. She agreed, though I could hear the hesitation in her voice. Fine, she said. But you better make it worth my while. It was a gamble, trusting Janice, but I didn't have a choice. If I wanted to expose Jake without destroying the bank in the process, I needed her on my side. And so, the trap was set. Jake went about his days as if nothing had changed, strolling into the bank with that same arrogant smirk, oblivious to the storm brewing just out of sight. Every time I saw him, it took everything in me not to confront him again, not to wipe that smug look off his face. But I held back. Soon, I told myself. Soon, he'll get what's coming to him. And when he did, it wouldn't just be justice. It would be personal. The hardest part about waiting was pretending everything was fine. Every morning, I walked into the bank, greeted the staff, and carried on like nothing was wrong, all while Jake moved through his day with that same carefree arrogance. He had no idea the walls were closing in. The evidence was piling up faster than I could organize it. Sophia's contact had uncovered a web of deceit that stretched further than I imagined. Jake hadn't just stolen from Ridgecliffe Trust. He'd used the stolen money to finance a lavish double life, vacations, luxury cars, and even a secret apartment in the city. The man who claimed he was just trying to survive was living like a king while hard-working families struggled to make ends meet. What sickened me most was how casual he seemed about it all. He'd stop by my office with that same cocky grin, asking if I wanted to grab lunch or go over the monthly reports. It was like he thought I was too stupid to see what he was doing, or too weak to stop him. But he made a mistake. A big one. One Friday afternoon, Jake announced he was heading out early. "Big weekend plans," he said, winking at me as he grabbed his coat. "Don't work too hard, Aaron." I nodded, forcing a polite smile as he walked out the door. The moment he was gone, I sprang into action. Jake's office was locked, but I'd prepared for this. Over the past week, I'd noticed how carelessly he'd leave his keys lying around. On his desk, in the break room, even in the diner down the street. It only took a little sleight of hand to borrow them without him noticing. With the office empty, I unlocked his door and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of cologne, and his desk was a mess of papers and half-empty coffee cups. I didn't have much time, so I got to work, sifting through files, drawers, and anything that might hold a clue. And that's when I found it. A ledger, hidden in a false bottom of his desk drawer. Inside were handwritten notes detailing every stolen dollar, every fake loan, every lie he'd told to cover his tracks. It was all there in black and white, a confession plain as day. I took photos of every page with my phone, my hands trembling as I worked. This was it. The smoking gun. But just as I was about to close the drawer, I heard footsteps. My heart stopped. I quickly locked the desk and stepped away, pretending to inspect a painting on the wall as the door creaked open. It wasn't Jake, thank God, it was Lisa, our head teller. "Oh, Aaron, I didn't know you were in here," she said, looking surprised. "Just checking on some files for next week's audit," I said, trying to sound casual. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just finishing up for the day," she said. "You need anything before I go?" "No, I'm good. Have a great weekend." She smiled and left, and I let out a shaky breath. That was too close. By the time I locked Jake's office and left the bank, the adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. Jake wouldn't notice the missing ledger, at least not yet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking a razor's edge. That night, I met Sophia at the diner, sliding into the booth across from her. She took one look at my face and frowned. "What happened?" she asked, her voice low. "I got it," I said, pulling out my phone and showing her the photos. "This is everything we need to take him down." She scrolled through the pictures, her expression shifting from shock to anger. This is insane. How did you even?" "I don't want to talk about it," I said, cutting her off. "The point is, we have him. Now it's just a matter of timing." She nodded, but her brow furrowed. "Aaron, are you sure about this? Once this goes public, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I said, my voice firm. "He made his choices. Now he has to live with the consequences." Sophia reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "Just promise me you'll be careful. Jake's not the kind of man who goes down without a fight." "I promise," I said, squeezing her hand. But even as I said the words, a part of me knew she was right. Jake was going to fight back. And I needed to be ready. By the time Monday rolled around, the tension was so thick it felt like the walls of Ridgecliffe Trust were closing in on me. Jake swaggered in as usual, his carefree attitude grating on my nerves. He strolled past my office, coffee in hand, giving me a mock salute. "Morning, boss," he called out. I didn't respond, keeping my eyes on the stack of papers in front of me. Inside, though, I was counting down the hours. That day, I finalized everything. The anonymous dossier I'd prepared for the Ridgecliffe Sentinel was ready to send. It included every piece of evidence, scans of the ledger, screenshots of Jake's fraudulent transactions, and a carefully written statement framing the corruption as an isolated case. The goal was clear, to expose Jake without letting the scandal take the bank down with him. But that wasn't enough for me. I needed Jake to know this wasn't some anonymous whistleblower or an external audit. This was personal. He'd betrayed me, Leah, and everyone who depended on Ridgecliffe Trust. And I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized it. I didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, Janice Harper from the Sentinel called me. "We're going live with the story tomorrow morning," she said. "Are you ready for this?" "More than ready," I replied. Once I hung up, I knew it was time to act. I couldn't wait for the story to break in the paper. I needed to confront Jake before the whole town knew. I waited until the bank closed, letting the staff filter out one by one. Jake was always the last to leave, usually because he spent an extra hour in his office pretending to work while actually scrolling through social media. When the bank was quiet, I walked into his office and shut the door behind me. He looked up from his computer, his smirk faltering when he saw my expression. "What's this about?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a copy of the ledger pages, and dropped them onto his desk. The sound echoed in the quiet room. Jake stared at the papers, his face paling. "What the hell is this?" "You tell me," I said, crossing my arms. He picked up the pages, his hands shaking ever so slightly as he flipped through them. For the first time, his usual confidence was nowhere to be found. This doesn't prove anything," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Oh, it proves plenty," I said, stepping closer. "It proves that you've been stealing from this bank, and this town, for months. It proves that every time you smiled in someone's face, you were lying to them. And tomorrow, it's all going public." Jake's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "What are you talking about?" "I sent everything to the Sentinel," I said, my voice cold. "By this time tomorrow, the entire town will know exactly who you are." He stood abruptly, knocking his chair over in the process. "You're bluffing," he said, his voice rising. "You wouldn't do that. You'd destroy the bank." "No," I said calmly. "You destroyed the bank the moment you decided to steal from it. I'm just making sure you take the fall alone." Jake's face twisted in anger, and for a moment, I thought he might actually try to hit me. But then his shoulders sagged, and he sank back down into his chair, his head in his hands. "You don't understand, Aaron," he muttered. "I had no choice. I was in too deep. The debts. The people I owed." "I don't care," I said sharply. "You could have come to me. We could have figured something out. But instead, you chose to stab me in the back. You chose to betray Leah's trust." At the mention of her name, Jake flinched, his face contorting with guilt. "Don't bring her into this," he said weakly. "She's always been in this," I said. "She believed in you. She convinced me to believe in you. And this is how you repay her." Jake didn't respond. He just sat there, defeated, staring blankly at the pages on his desk. I turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Tomorrow morning," I said. "Be ready. Because when the town comes for you, I won't stop them." As I walked out of his office, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, satisfaction, and an odd sense of loss. Jake had been a part of my life for so long, and now he was nothing more than a cautionary tale. But as I locked the door behind me and stepped into the cool night air, one thing was certain. Jake Mercer's reign of deceit was over. Tomorrow, the storm would break. And I'd be there to watch it all come crashing down. The next morning, Ridgecliff woke up to chaos. The Sentinel hit the stands with a headline that couldn't be ignored. "Fraud at Ridgecliff Trust. Insider accused of embezzlement." By 9 a.m., the phones at the bank were ringing non-stop. Customers were furious, confused, scared. The staff looked shell-shocked, whispering in small huddles as they tried to manage the fallout. I kept my head down, answering questions as best I could and reassuring everyone that Ridgecliff Trust was still standing, still secure. But the spotlight wasn't on the bank. It was on Jake. I stepped out of my office and saw him sitting at his desk, hunched over, staring at his phone. The color had drained from his face, and the confident smirk he always wore was long gone. It was a strange thing, seeing a man stripped of all his armor. I let him sit in silence for a while. Let the weight of his actions sink in. Finally, I walked over and stood in front of his desk. "Jake," I said evenly. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot. You really did it," he whispered. "I warned you," I replied. His phone buzzed, and he flinched like it had burned him. "Do you know how many people have called me today?" he said, his voice cracking. "The cops. My family. Reporters. Everyone wants a piece of me. And they'll get it, I said coldly. This is what happens when you betray people who trust you. Jake stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Do you think you're some kind of hero, Aaron? He snapped. You think this makes you better than me? I don't think I'm a hero, I said, holding his gaze. I think I'm a man cleaning up your mess. He let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his hair. You don't get it. You've never been desperate. You've never had people breathing down your neck, threatening to ruin your life if you didn't pay up. I had no choice. You always had a choice, I said sharply. You just chose yourself over everyone else. Before he could respond, the glass doors of the bank swung open, and 2 uniformed police officers walked in. Jake froze, his eyes darting between them and me. No, he muttered, backing away. No, no, no. The officers approached his desk, their expressions grim. Jake Mercer, one of them said. Jake looked at me, his face a mixture of anger and panic. You didn't have to do this, Aaron, he said, his voice trembling. Yes, I did, I replied. The officers read him his rights, their voices calm and practiced. Jake didn't resist, but as they cuffed him and led him out of the bank, he turned back to look at me one last time. You think this is over, he said, his voice low and venomous. You'll regret this. You'll see. I didn't respond. I just watched as the doors closed behind him, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. The rest of the day was a whirlwind. Customers came in demanding answers, some angry, others just worried. I held a meeting with the staff, explaining what had happened and assuring them that the bank's future was secure. It wasn't easy, but I could see the relief in their faces as I spoke. When the day finally ended, I locked up the bank and stepped out into the crisp evening air. Sophia was waiting for me in her car, her face lighting up when she saw me. How'd it go? She asked as I climbed into the passenger seat. I let out a heavy sigh. It's done, I said. The police took him away this morning. She reached over and squeezed my hand. You did the right thing, Aaron. The town will see that eventually. Maybe, I said, staring out the window. But it doesn't feel like a victory. Not yet. She didn't say anything, just leaned her head on my shoulder as we drove back to my house. That night, as I sat in my office going through paperwork, I thought about what Jake had said before he was arrested. You'll regret this. You'll see. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. And as much as I hated to admit it, part of me believed him. The fallout was far from over. In a small town like Ridgecliff, news travels faster than wildfire. By the next morning, Jake's arrest wasn't just a headline. It was the only topic anyone cared about. Farmers stopped plowing fields to talk about it, shopkeepers gossiped over their counters, and at the diner, the usual chatter about weather and crop prices had been replaced with one name: Jake Mercer. I should have felt relief, but instead, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. It wasn't just Jake who'd been exposed, it was Ridgecliff Trust. The bank I'd built to help this town now had its reputation dragged through the mud, even if it wasn't my fault. I spent most of the day in damage control mode. Calls came in from local businesses, clients, even people who didn't bank with us, all wanting to know if their money was safe. Mr. Cade, are you sure this doesn't affect our accounts? An older gentleman named Mr. Holcomb asked me. He'd been a loyal customer for years, one of the first people to believe in Ridgecliff Trust when I opened it. I promise you, your money is safe, I assured him. The police froze Jake's personal accounts, and every stolen dollar is being tracked down. You have nothing to worry about. He nodded slowly, but the doubt in his eyes stung more than I cared to admit. That evening, as I walked into the diner, the usual hum of conversation stopped abruptly. Every pair of eyes turned to me. I nodded at a few familiar faces and made my way to the counter, where Sophia was waiting with a mug of coffee. You didn't have to come in today, she said softly. Yes, I did, I replied, sliding onto the stool. If I stay hidden, people will think I have something to hide. Let them look. Let them ask questions. She hesitated, then leaned in closer. Most of them don't blame you, Aaron, she said. But there are a few who, well, they're angry. People are scared. You know how it is. I nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. It was scalding hot, but I barely noticed. What are they saying? I asked. Sophia hesitated, her gaze flicking to the table of older men in the corner who were talking quietly among themselves. Some think you should have known what Jake was up to. Others think you were too soft on him, letting him stay as long as he did. I set the mug down with a bit more force than I intended. I trusted him, I said, my voice tight. Leah trusted him. He was family. How do you prepare for something like that? Sophia reached out and placed her hand on mine. You don't, she said gently. And anyone who knows you understands that. But not everyone in Ridgecliff understood. As I left the diner, I heard someone mutter under their breath, loud enough for me to catch. All this time, and he didn't see it. Some hero. I stopped in my tracks, my fists clenching at my sides. But when I turned, the man, a burly farmer with a gray beard, just stared at me, unflinching. Something to say? I asked, my voice calm but cold. He shrugged. I'm just saying, maybe you should have kept a closer eye on your people. A lot of us trusted you, Aaron. You let us down. His words cut deeper than I expected, but I didn't let it show. You're right, I said evenly. I did let you down. But I'm fixing it. And until this is resolved, I'm not going anywhere. The man held my gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod and turned back to his coffee. By the time I got home that night, exhaustion was starting to catch up with me. Sophia was already there, sitting on the couch with a book in her lap. You look like you've been through hell, she said as I walked in. Feels like it, I admitted, sinking into the armchair. She closed the book and set it aside, watching me carefully. You're carrying too much again, she said softly. I don't have a choice, I replied, rubbing my temples. If I don't hold this together, the whole town falls apart. You can't do it all on your own, Aaron, she said, moving to sit on the arm of the chair. Let people help you. Let me help you. I looked up at her, and for a moment, the weight on my shoulders didn't feel quite so crushing. You already are, I said, pulling her into a hug. But even as I held her, Jake's words echoed in my mind. You'll regret this. You'll see. Because if I'd learned anything about betrayal, it was this. The first blow was never the last. The days after Jake's arrest were a delicate balancing act. I focused on damage control at the bank, reassuring customers that their accounts were safe and that Ridgecliff Trust wasn't going anywhere. Most people seemed to believe me, but there were cracks I couldn't ignore. Suspicion lingered in their eyes, whispers followed me wherever I went, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Ridgecliff's trust in me wasn't as unshakable as it once was. But just as I started to think the worst was behind me, another problem reared its head. It started with a phone call. I was in my office, going over the latest updates from the forensic accountant, when my secretary buzzed in. Aaron, there's a call for you on line 2. He says it's urgent. Who is it? I asked, already bracing myself for another angry customer. He wouldn't give his name, she said, lowering her voice. But he sounds serious. I sighed and picked up the phone. This is Aaron Cade. Mr. Cade, the voice on the other end said, smooth and low. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance. Jake Mercer. My heart sank. Who is this? Let's just say I'm someone Jake owes a lot of money to, the man said, his tone hardening. And now that he's in custody, he can't exactly pay up. That leaves me with a problem. And since you're the one who made sure he got arrested, I figured you might be able to help me out. I leaned back in my chair, gripping the phone tightly. I don't have anything to do with Jake's debts, I said carefully. Whatever he owes you, that's between you and him. The man chuckled, but there was no humor in it. See, that's where you're wrong, Mr. Cade. Jake stole from your bank to pay me. And now that the money's dried up, I'm left holding the bag. You understand how that looks, don't you? I felt a chill run down my spine. Are you threatening me? I'm just giving you an opportunity, he said smoothly. You're a smart man, Mr. Cade. You don't want this to get messy. All I need is what Jake owed me, and I'll consider the matter closed. Otherwise, well, let's just say I have ways of making my point. The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me sitting there in stunned silence. I immediately called Sophia. She picked up on the second ring, her voice warm as always. Hey, Aaron. What's up? I need to see you, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Is everything okay? She asked, her tone shifting to concern. Just come by the house tonight, I said. I'll explain everything then. That evening, as Sophia sat across from me at the kitchen table, I recounted the phone call. Her expression grew darker with every word. "This is serious, Aaron," she said when I finished. "Whoever this guy is, he's dangerous." "I know," I said, running a hand through my hair. "But what am I supposed to do? Pay him off? That money belongs to the bank, belongs to the people of Ridgecliff. I can't just hand it over to some criminal." "And you won't," she said firmly. "But you need to be careful. If this guy is connected to Jake, there's no telling what he's capable of." We spent the rest of the evening coming up with a plan. Sophia suggested reaching out to the police, but I hesitated. The last thing Ridgecliff Trust needed was more scandal. Instead, I decided to document everything, record any future calls, save any messages, and keep a detailed log of every interaction. But even as I tried to focus on the logistics, the weight of the situation pressed down on me. Jake's betrayal had already shaken the foundation of my life, and now it felt like his mistakes were dragging me into an even darker place. Later that night, as Sophia and I sat on the couch, she took my hand in hers. "You're not in this alone, Aaron," she said softly. I looked at her, grateful but wary. "I appreciate that, Sophia. I really do. But I'm not going to let this touch you. Or anyone else. If this guy comes after me, he's coming after me." Her grip on my hand tightened. "You're a good man, Aaron. But don't let your pride get in the way of asking for help when you need it." I nodded, though a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that asking for help would only make me seem weaker. I had to be strong, for the bank, for the town, for Leah's memory. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning of a new kind of storm, one I wasn't sure I could weather. The next few days felt like walking on a minefield. Every time my phone rang, I half expected to hear that smooth, menacing voice again. But the silence wasn't comforting, it was unsettling. Whoever Jake owed wasn't the kind of man to just let things go. He was planning something, and the waiting was starting to eat at me. The first sign of trouble came on a Thursday morning. Lisa, our head teller, rushed into my office looking panicked. "Aaron, we've got a problem," she said, clutching a piece of paper in her hand. "What is it?" I asked, already on edge. She handed me the paper, a demand letter, typed in plain black ink. It was brief but chilling. "Pay what's owed, or Ridgecliff Trust will pay the price." "Where did this come from?" I asked, my voice low. "It was in the night deposit box this morning," Lisa said. "Who would?" "I'll handle it," I interrupted, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "For now, don't tell anyone. The staff doesn't need to panic." She nodded, though I could see the unease in her eyes. As soon as she left, I locked the door and called Sophia. She arrived at the bank within the hour, her expression grim as I showed her the letter. "This guy isn't messing around," she said, her voice hushed. "I know," I replied. "But what am I supposed to do? I can't give him what he wants." "We need to go to the police, Aaron," Sophia said firmly. "This is extortion. They'll take it seriously." I hesitated, staring at the letter on my desk. Every instinct told me she was right, but I couldn't shake the fear that involving the police would only make things worse. Ridgecliff had already been through so much because of Jake's betrayal. Could it handle another scandal? Before I could decide, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Sophia and I exchanged a look, and I answered. "Mr. Cade," the smooth voice said, calm and composed. "What do you want?" I asked, gripping the phone tightly. "What's owed?" the man replied. "I trust you received my message this morning?" "I'm not giving you anything," I said, forcing steel into my voice. "You can threaten me all you want, but I won't use the bank's money to pay off Jake's debts." The man chuckled, a sound that made my skin crawl. "You're a brave man, Mr. Cade. But bravery has its limits. I suggest you reconsider, before someone gets hurt." The line went dead, and I set the phone down, my hand trembling slightly. Sophia crossed her arms, her jaw tight. "This has gone far enough, Aaron. You're calling the police." This time, I didn't argue. 2 officers came to the bank later that afternoon, taking the letter and my statement. They assured me they'd look into it, but their calm professionalism didn't ease my nerves. Whoever this man was, he wasn't someone the local police were used to dealing with. That night, I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows, feeling a paranoia I hadn't experienced since Leah's illness. Every creak, every shadow, felt like a threat. Around midnight, Sophia called to check on me. "I don't like the idea of you being alone right now," she said. "I'll be fine," I lied. "You don't have to do this on your own, Aaron," she said softly. "I know," I replied, though deep down, I wasn't sure I believed it. The next morning, things escalated. When I arrived at the bank, I found a group of employees huddled outside the front doors, whispering nervously. As I approached, I saw why. The glass on the front door had been smashed, shards glittering on the ground. "What happened?" I demanded. "No idea," Lisa said, her voice trembling. "It must have happened overnight." Inside, nothing seemed to be stolen, but the message was clear. This wasn't about money, it was about intimidation. I called the police again, who filed another report and promised to increase patrols near the bank. But their assurances felt hollow. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. That evening, as I sat in my office reviewing security footage, Sophia showed up unannounced. "You're coming to stay at my place," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Sophia." "No," she interrupted, her eyes blazing. "I'm not letting you sit here waiting for something worse to happen. Pack a bag. Now." I stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. That night, as I settled onto her couch, I realized just how exhausted I was. Not just physically, but emotionally. 4 months, I'd been holding everything together. Ridgecliff Trust, the town's faith in me, my own sanity. And now it felt like it was all slipping through my fingers. But even as I drifted off to sleep, one thought burned in my mind. Whoever this man was, he'd made a mistake. He thought I was weak. He was wrong. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. Sophia was in the kitchen, her hair tied back, moving with the quiet efficiency I'd come to admire. For a moment, I allowed myself to just watch her. Despite everything, she brought me a calm I hadn't felt in years. "Good morning," she said, placing a mug on the table. "Morning," I muttered, taking a sip. "We're going to figure this out," she said, sitting across from me. "But we need to be smart about it. Whoever this guy is, he's trying to make you desperate. Don't give him the satisfaction." Her words settled something in me. She was right. Desperation was what he wanted. If I panicked, I'd lose. By noon, I was back at the bank. The shattered glass had been replaced, but the tension in the air was palpable. Customers came and went, some glancing at me with pity, others with suspicion. I knew what they were thinking. Was Ridgecliff Trust on the verge of collapse? I spent the day going through the accounts, cross-referencing transactions, and double-checking that every penny was where it should be. Whatever this man thought he could take from me, I was determined not to let him touch the town's money. Then, just before closing, the next move came. Lisa walked into my office holding a package, her face pale. "This was left in the drop box," she said, setting it on my desk. I stared at the plain brown box, my stomach churning. Slowly, I unwrapped it, revealing a single item inside, a burned ledger page. One of Jake's. "That's impossible," I muttered, my heart racing. I'd locked the originals in a safe, and the copies were with the police. There was no note, no explanation. Just the page, charred around the edges. It was a message, and I didn't need words to understand it. "They're watching me," I whispered, more to myself than to Lisa. "What should we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Close up the bank for the day," I said. "And Lisa, don't mention this to anyone." She nodded and left, but the weight of the situation pressed down on me like a boulder. That evening, I called Sophia again, filling her in on the package. "This guy's more connected than I thought," I admitted. Sophia was silent for a moment, then said, "Aaron, you can't play this game forever. It's time to take a bigger step." "What are you thinking?" "Call the state police," she said firmly. "This is beyond what the local department can handle. You need people who have the resources to track this guy down." As much as I hated to admit it, she was right. The following morning, 2 state detectives arrived at the bank. They were sharp, no-nonsense types who wasted no time. "Mr. Cade," one of them said, shaking my hand. "We've been briefed on the situation. Let's talk." Over the next few hours, I laid everything out. The phone calls, the letter, the vandalism, the package. They listened intently, taking notes and asking precise questions. "This isn't just extortion," one of them said when I finished. "This is intimidation with the intent to control. Whoever this is, they're trying to wear you down until you give them what they want." "What do I do?" I asked, my voice raw. "You stand firm," the detective said. "We'll be monitoring your calls and watching the bank. But you need to keep running things as usual. If you panic, they win." The next few days were tense but uneventful. I followed the detective's advice, keeping a low profile and focusing on the bank. Sophia stayed close, her presence a constant reminder that I wasn't in this alone. Then, on the fourth day, the break came. I was in my office when one of the detectives called. "We traced the phone number from the threats," he said. "It's linked to a burner, but we've got a lead on who's been using it." "Who?" I asked, gripping the edge of my desk. "A man named Victor Hale," the detective replied. "Known associate of Jake Mercer. And Mr. Cade, this guy's dangerous. He's got a record a mile long. Fraud, extortion, even assault." The name sent a chill down my spine. "What happens now?" "We've issued a warrant for his arrest," the detective said. "It's only a matter of time before we bring him in. Until then, stay vigilant. He might make one last move." That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up, pacing the living room, staring out the window at the quiet street. Every shadow felt like a threat, every sound like a warning. But nothing happened. 2 days later, I got the call. "We've got him," the detective said. "Victor Hale's in custody." Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by exhaustion. "Did he say anything?" "Plenty," the detective replied. "He confirmed everything. Jake's debts, the threats, the vandalism. It's over, Mr. Cade." When the news broke that Victor Hale had been arrested, Ridgecliff let out a collective sigh of relief. The tension that had gripped the town began to ease, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Sophia and I sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "You did it," she said, smiling softly. "No," I said, shaking my head. "We did it. I couldn't have gotten through this without you." She leaned into me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself relax. The storm was over. Ridgecliff was still standing, and so was I. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. Sophia was in the kitchen, her hair tied back, moving with the quiet efficiency I'd come to admire. For a moment, I allowed myself to just watch her. Despite everything, she brought me a calm I hadn't felt in years. "Good morning," she said, placing a mug on the table. "Morning," I muttered, taking a sip. "We're going to figure this out," she said, sitting across from me. "But we need to be smart about it. Whoever this guy is, he's trying to make you desperate. Don't give him the satisfaction." Her words settled something in me. She was right. Desperation was what he wanted. If I panicked, I'd lose. By noon, I was back at the bank. The shattered glass had been replaced, but the tension in the air was palpable. Customers came and went, some glancing at me with pity, others with suspicion. I knew what they were thinking. Was Ridgecliff Trust on the verge of collapse? I spent the day going through the accounts, cross-referencing transactions, and double-checking that every penny was where it should be. Whatever this man thought he could take from me, I was determined not to let him touch the town's money. Then, just before closing, the next move came. Lisa walked into my office holding a package, her face pale. "This was left in the drop box," she said, setting it on my desk. I stared at the plain brown box, my stomach churning. Slowly, I unwrapped it, revealing a single item inside, a burned ledger page. One of Jake's. "That's impossible," I muttered, my heart racing. I'd locked the originals in a safe, and the copies were with the police. There was no note, no explanation, just the page, charred around the edges. It was a message, and I didn't need words to understand it. "They're watching me," I whispered, more to myself than to Lisa. "What should we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Close up the bank for the day," I said. "And Lisa, don't mention this to anyone." She nodded and left, but the weight of the situation pressed down on me like a boulder. That evening, I called Sophia again, filling her in on the package. "This guy's more connected than I thought," I admitted. Sophia was silent for a moment, then said, "Aaron, you can't play this game forever. It's time to take a bigger step." "What are you thinking?" "Call the state police," she said firmly. "This is beyond what the local department can handle. You need people who have the resources to track this guy down." As much as I hated to admit it, she was right. The following morning, 2 state detectives arrived at the bank. They were sharp, no-nonsense types who wasted no time. "Mr. Cade," one of them said, shaking my hand. "We've been briefed on the situation. Let's talk." Over the next few hours, I laid everything out. The phone calls, the letter, the vandalism, the package. They listened intently, taking notes and asking precise questions. "This isn't just extortion," one of them said when I finished. "This is intimidation with the intent to control. Whoever this is, they're trying to wear you down until you give them what they want." "What do I do?" I asked, my voice raw. "You stand firm," the detective said. "We'll be monitoring your calls and watching the bank. But you need to keep running things as usual. If you panic, they win." The next few days were tense but uneventful. I followed the detective's advice, keeping a low profile and focusing on the bank. Sophia stayed close, her presence a constant reminder that I wasn't in this alone. Then, on the 4th day, the break came. I was in my office when one of the detectives called. "We traced the phone number from the threats," he said. "It's linked to a burner, but we've got a lead on who's been using it." "Who?" I asked, gripping the edge of my desk. "A man named Victor Hale," the detective replied. "Known associate of Jake Mercer. And Mr. Cade, this guy's dangerous. He's got a record a mile long. Fraud, extortion, even assault." The name sent a chill down my spine. "What happens now?" "We've issued a warrant for his arrest," the detective said. "It's only a matter of time before we bring him in. Until then, stay vigilant. He might make one last move." That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up, pacing the living room, staring out the window at the quiet street. Every shadow felt like a threat, every sound like a warning. But nothing happened. 2 days later, I got the call. "We've got him," the detective said. "Victor Hale's in custody." Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by exhaustion. "Did he say anything?" "Plenty," the detective replied. "He confirmed everything. Jake's debts, the threats, the vandalism. It's over, Mr. Cade." When the news broke that Victor Hale had been arrested, Ridgecliff let out a collective sigh of relief. The tension that had gripped the town began to ease, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Sophia and I sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "You did it," she said, smiling softly. "No," I said, shaking my head. "We did it. I couldn't have gotten through this without you." She leaned into me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself relax. The storm was over. Ridgecliff was still standing, and so was I.